This video is aimed at giving you an insight into how to tackle AQA's Language Paper 1 for GCSE. It will focus on Section A, the reading section. And whilst I hope the video will be helpful and useful to all students, it is particularly aimed in its strategies and the examples at those students looking to achieve the highest grades from grade 7 to grade 9. The structure of the paper for Section A, this is the reading section where you are given an extract and then asked 4 questions about that extract. Question 1, worth 4 marks. You are asked to read a section, a small section, and to list 4 things about a particular focus. Question 2 is always how does the writer use language, worth 8 marks. Question 3 is also always about how the writer has structured the text, worth 8 marks. And then question 4, you are given a statement about one section of the text and then asked to what extent do you agree with that statement. That's the most important question in this section of the paper because it's worth 20 marks. In terms of timings, the exam board advise you to spend 1 hour on this section of the paper. Assuming you are going to spend 10 to 15 minutes reading and annotating the extract, which is probably what is required, that leaves you just over 1 minute per mark for actually writing your answers. So you can see this is a demanding paper in terms of the variety of skills that it assesses and the time that you are allotted to write your answers to those questions. For this paper and this section of the paper, you are given an insert from a piece of fiction, and it will tell you on the front cover of the insert where that extract is taken from, which text it is taken from, who the author is, and where in that particular text the extract is taken from. Here it says an extract from the middle of a short story. Question 1 then focuses usually on the beginning of the text. Now you ignore the bit in the box at the top of the text. That is just a little introduction giving you some context about this particular extract. So you ignore that in terms of answering the question. It might be useful for you to read it just to give you an idea of what is happening here. But question 1 will say something like, read again the first part of the source, and in this case it says from lines 1 to 9. List 4 things about this jungle from this part of the source. 2 things to focus on here. The first one is, which lines are you asked to refer to? In this case it's lines 1 to 9. And what are you asked to list 4 things about? In this case it's the jungle. If you get those 2 things right, cover the lines that it asks you to look at, and make sure you're clear about the focus of the question, in this case the jungle, you should and you have to get 4 marks on this question. You just need to be careful with it. In this case, if you read this section, there are lots of different possibilities. The jungle was high, broad, sounds like music could be heard. The jungle was high and broad. I've repeated myself there. Full of twitterings, full of rustlings, lots of different possibilities here. Pterodactyls flying above the jungle, etc. But make sure your answer is about the jungle here, not about the characters in it or about the animals in it. Really, that's kind of a loose connection. Make your connection specific and you'll be fine. Question 2 is always about language, and in the exam paper it will give you a section of the extract just like this to look at in particular. It says, look in detail at this extract from lines 16 to 26. How does the writer use language here to describe the Tyrannosaurus rex? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. It's worth 8 marks. Now, the question will always give you a number of lines to look at. It will always start by saying, how does the writer use language here? It's only the focus of the question which changes. and here it's to describe the Tyrannosaurus rex. You must make sure your answer relates to the description of the Tyrannosaurus rex and nothing else. And then the 3 bullet points there, words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms, will always be there. They're exactly the same every single time. I always discourage my students from talking about sentence forms. I always think if you start to talk about the effect of sentence forms, you're struggling. There should be enough in the words and phrases that are used and the language devices and techniques that are used to write a detailed response here. So my advice to students is to avoid writing about sentence forms. It's very, very difficult to say something insightful about a sentence type. So I'm going to read this and I'll discuss as I go through it what I might pick out of this, this particular extract. Now I'm looking for language devices first and foremost, but I'm also looking for words that have power and meaning, that are doing something more than just being a word on the page. They have wider meaning and symbolism and significance. It came on great, oiled, resilient, striding legs. Straight away, I might pick out the list in this opening sentence, which emphasizes the size and impressive quality of the Tyrannosaurus. It towered 30 feet above half of the trees, a great evil god. Well, a great evil god is a metaphor. I'm going to underline that straight away. I might not start thinking about what the connotations of that are if I do know them. In this case, omnipotent perhaps. I might jot that down on my exam paper. Folding its delicate watchmaker's claws. Well, here I'm looking at the metaphor again of the watchmaker, close to its oily reptilian chest. Each lower leg was a piston, another metaphor. 1,000 pounds of white bone sunk in thick ropes of muscle, sheathed over in a gleam of pebbled skin, like the armour of a terrible warrior. Like the armour of a terrible warrior, that's a simile. I'm going to underline it or highlight it, and then think about its significance afterwards. Each thigh was a ton of meat, ivory and steel mesh, and from the great breathing cage of the upper body, there's another metaphor. Those 2 delicate arms dangled out in front. Well, we've got delicate repeated twice here. That's repetition, delicate watchmaker, and then delicate arms. And we also have the juxtaposition between delicate and indestructible. I might make a note of juxtaposition there. Dangled out in front, arms with hands which might pick up and examine men like toys. Another simile, I'm going to highlight it. While the snake neck coiled, and the head itself a ton of sculptured stone, lifted easily upon the sky, its mouth gaped, exposing a fence of teeth like daggers. Another simile. Lots of language devices in here, and the extracts they give you will often be littered with language devices. Its eyes rolled ostrich eggs. Another metaphor. Empty of all expression save hunger. It closed its mouth in a death grin. Another metaphor. It ran its pelvic bones, crushing aside trees and bushes. Crushing. I like to analyse powerful verbs. And so if you're struggling for language devices, look out for powerful verbs, and crushing there. Its taloned feet clawing damp earth. Another animalistic, dynamic, powerful verb, leaving prints 6 inches deep wherever it's settled its weight. So there's lots. This is a very, very rich extract in terms of powerful language and language devices. So then you would identify at least 2, possibly 3 examples from this extract to talk about in this question. And what you're asked to focus on is the detail of analysis. That means you're going to say a lot about a little. You're going to focus on individual word choices. You're going to analyse at word level. And wherever possible, you're going to be analysing language devices, such as similes, metaphors, personification, juxtaposition, oxymorons, repetition, zoomorphism, semantic fields. Lots of different language devices that you might analyse. And I've got an example here, a great evil God folding its delicate watchmaker's claws. And I'm going to try and exemplify the kind of detail that you might analyse a quotation in. So here, if we take God first of all, there's our metaphor. Now, it's important not to just identify the technique, but to discuss its connotations and significance. This metaphor perhaps suggests something omnipotent, powerful, controlling. These are all connotations of something godlike. At the same time, there's an oxymoronic nature to that phrase, evil God, something which is normally benevolent and kind, here is presented as something evil and malevolent, and that is unsettling in some ways. Delicate comes with connotations of something soft and fragile, but actually that juxtaposition intensifies the power and threat. How can something so seemingly fragile contain such power? That is disturbing in lots of ways. And then the metaphor of the watchmaker's claws may suggest that this is a beast which is precise in its action and precise in its movement. And if something has power and strength and is careful and precise, then its threat is intensified. So lots you can do with a small piece of information in the text. And this time I want to focus, if it's not a language device in particular, you can still analyse individual word choices in great detail. Here we have a ton of sculptured stone. Now, sculptured might suggest a work of art, which comes with connotations of perfection. This might be a perfect killing machine. A ton, of course, has connotations of weight and size and therefore power. And stone is something solid and indestructible. So again, lots you can do with a very small quotation. And those are the phrases that you are looking for, the ones that can contain lots of possibility for you in terms of analysis. And how might this look in a piece of writing then? Well, in terms of opening your answer, don't forget you can use the words from the question. I would advise you not to put the writer uses language here. When my students put that, I've always put a note in the margin. Of course he or she uses language. They're a writer. Instead, in this section of the extract, the writer describes the Tyrannosaurus rex. That's the question. How does the writer use language to describe the Tyrannosaurus rex? So I just use that in the opening sentence in a way which makes it terrifying to both the reader and the characters within the narrative. And now you've got to bring in your examples and start to analyse them in detail. When the beast is described as a great evil god, the use of the metaphor heightens the dinosaur's power with the connotations of omnipotence, making it seem as though the beast can control and manipulate the men at will. Moreover, the oxymoronic nature of evil god, coupled with the benevolence of a god, with the malevolent intent of the devil, making the T-Rex appear particularly menacing and unsettling. Now here, what I'm doing is picking out technique. There's the metaphor. I've picked out the oxymoronic nature of that metaphor. I'm talking about connotations and meaning. And then I like words like furthermore and moreover because it means you're building layers of analysis into your answer. And then bring in another example. The T-Rex's threat is perhaps intensified further when we learn of its delicate watchmaker's claws, where the juxtaposition of delicate with the power of God highlights that the monster is unnatural, which reinforces its disturbing nature. Furthermore, the metaphor of the watchmaker highlights that the T-Rex combined brute strength with precision, a combination which makes it truly terrifying. You'll notice the verbs I'm using here: heightens, intensified, reinforces, highlights. One verb that is banned amongst my students is shows. Try to avoid using this shows. Instead, use a verb which does a lot more for your writing. Highlights and intensifies are much more informative than the verb shows. So try to vary your analytical verbs. But again, here I'm focused on method and meaning. And that would already be pretty much an 8-mark answer, such as the detail of the analysis. But this paragraph just exemplifies how you can emphasize just words instead of instead of techniques. The power of the T-Rex is perhaps most powerfully highlighted with the description of it as a ton of sculptured stone. Its indestructibility is exemplified through the connotations of stone, whilst the fact that there is a ton of it only goes to emphasize its impenetrability. Moreover, the word sculptured suggests a work of art, as if this dinosaur is the most perfect killing machine ever made. So really it's about getting into your quotations and dragging out as much meaning as you can. That is where the marks are in this question. You need at least 2 references, possibly and probably 3 references from the extract as part of your answer. You're not going to have time to write all of that I put there. That's just to show what you might do. Because it's only an 8-mark question, you therefore only have 8 minutes really to write this up. You're looking to write about half a side of A4 for this particular answer. Question 3 then, another 8-marker and an entirely different skill. This is the only question which is phrased exactly the same every time. In the other questions, the phrasing is almost identical, you just get a different focus. Here, question 3, you now need to think about the whole of the source. It's also the only question in the paper which asks you to look at all of the extract. Everything else gives you a particular section of the extract to look at. This text is from the middle of a short story. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. Now, the bullet points are particularly pertinent here. I would encourage you to choose an example from the beginning of the source and then to work chronologically. So where it says how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, work chronologically through your source and give examples in chronological order. And then I'll look at structural features in a moment. Analysing structure, entirely different to analysing language. You do not analyse language in this question. You don't pick out keywords and you don't analyse language devices. Instead, you analyse the effects of the movements and shifts and changes and contrasts that we see as we go through the extract. And I try to encourage students to think about the emotional journey, not just of the characters in the text, but also the emotional journey of the reader as we respond to what is happening in the extract. Sometimes it's helpful to think about these 2 analogies here. A house. So it's the way you move through a house and your emotion might change as you move through your house. So, for example, if you move from a room that's in darkness to a room that's full of light, that light appears particularly bright because you've come from a dark room. If you move from a room which is carpeted into a room which has a hard wooden floor, that wooden floor might seem particularly harsh and particularly cold because you've just moved from a room with the comfort of a carpet. If you go from a room with soft lighting into a room with harsh lighting, the harsh lighting is intensified because you've come from a room with soft lighting. And it's those movements and the contrasts between different things which play with our emotions. And that's what you need to do in a structure question. The other analogy is of a river. And if you imagine you're traveling down a river in a boat, you might go down sections which are particularly calm, and you therefore feel peaceful and reassured and safe. But all of a sudden, the speed of the river picks up and you start noticing some rapids, and that causes you to feel tense and slightly concerned and slightly unsettled and less safe. And then you start to approach a waterfall and you feel particularly panicked and there's a sense of emergency. So it's the way in which things change suddenly and the contrast between different things which is important here. I like to encourage students to think about the journey, the emotional journey of the characters and the reader, and think about the following emotions. How does our sympathy for the characters establish and change as the extract develops. We might feel concern, we might feel shock, we might feel tension or relief or horror or a sense of foreboding. Think about our emotional reaction at each stage of the extract and how that emotional reaction is influenced by what we read before and what we read afterwards. And your structural verbs are going to be different from the verbs you might use in a language question where you're going to use things like emphasizes and highlights and suggests. Here, your verbs are suggesting movement. Something shifts or changes. Your sympathy changes. Your fear intensifies. The sound is magnified. Your concern increases, the tension lessens. So you're thinking about verbs which suggest movement and things which are shifting and changing. It's important in a structure question, it can be helpful to think about the way in which contrasts work. So if we have a moment of quiet in an extract, that then intensifies the noise when sound occurs. If we have calm at the start of an extract, that only serves to emphasize the chaos later in the text. If we have moments of dark, it heightens and it intensifies the moments of light. And if we are encouraged to sympathize, that serves to heighten our concern for characters as the extract develops. So those contrasts and those links are quite important. Other structural devices, juxtaposition and contrast, as I've said there, is crucial. Shifts in perspective, where the writer changes our view from one thing to another, can be important. The introduction of a character at the right time can be crucial in terms of our emotional response. Openings and endings are absolutely essential, particularly if there is a link between the ending and the beginning and there is a sense of a cyclical structure. Zooming in for particular detail or zooming out to give us a broader view might change our response. If the narrative perspective changes, who is telling the story changes, that might impact us. Flashbacks and flash forwards, and foreshadowing, the idea that something is suggested and therefore creates tension. So I'm going to read through this extract now and just go through my thought process in terms of structure as we go through. The jungle was high and the jungle was broad, sounds like music and flying tents filled the sky, and those were pterodactyls soaring with huge grey wings. Well, for me at the start here, there is a sense of calm and joy and celebration. Sounds like music and flying tents. There's something celebratory about that. And there's certainly something quite peaceful about it. I've hunted tiger, wild boar, buffalo, elephant, but now this is it, said Eccles. I'm shaking like a kid. Well, he's shaking like a kid, probably through excitement. And therefore that sense of celebration is intensified. Perhaps, though, he's starting to feel fear, and therefore we start to feel a little bit of concern. Ah, said Travis, everyone stopped. And the jungle was wide and full of twitterings, rustlings, murmurs and sighs. Soft sounds, which again highlight that sense of peace and quiet. Suddenly it ceased, as if someone had shut a door. Silence. But that softness all of a sudden becomes silence. That's where the tension really ramps up. And then a sound of thunder. And that sound of thunder is intensified by the silence that has come before it. And it perhaps foreshadows the entrance of the Tyrannosaurus Rex here. And here he comes. And then in comes the Tyrannosaurus. Now don't forget, a feeling of calm has been established. The character's excitement has been established, and we've started to feel some sense of sympathy and concern for those characters because of the silence and the thunder and the position they're in. And that's the moment the writer introduces the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And he really then zooms in on the detail of this Tyrannosaurus Rex and makes it seem something monstrous. Now, because he's established this calm, joyous setting, and because he's established our sympathy for the characters, that only serves to increase and intensify our sense of concern for them when this beast is introduced and he zooms in such detail on its monstrosity. And then we go back, the perspective is shifted back to the characters and we see their sense of panic. So we've gone from a feeling of excitement in the beginning to a feeling of sheer panic and fear now. And it is that contrast which makes us feel especially concerned for them, because they clearly aren't prepared. And it carries on, and then we get another zoom in. The tyrant lizard, its armoured flesh glittered like 1,000 green coins, crusted with slime, steamed. In the slime, tiny insects wriggled. And he zooms in on the character of the Tyrannosaurus Rex here to again intensify our sense of fear, which mirrors the fear of the characters. And it continues, the motion, the monster at the first motion lunged forward. It is increasingly powerful now. Its power, its monstrosity is increasing and magnifying, and therefore our sense of fear is intensifying and our sense of concern for the characters is increasing. You can see here how the writer is playing with the reader's emotions, changing them as we go, shifting them, increasing them. And then we get to the end, like a stone idol, like a mountain avalanche. Tyrannosaurus fell. And we return to the sense of peace at the end that we saw at the start. So in a way, we have a cyclical narrative, and it confirms overall the sense of control that human beings have. So writing about structure, I would always encourage you to start at the beginning of the extract, and I'll read an example here. At the beginning of the extract, the writer creates a calm and positive atmosphere with the description of the sounds like music. Here, the simile and word music establishes a feeling of joy and celebration. That's not what you do. Because what I've done, I've started at the beginning of the extract, great. But what I do in the final sentence, the simile and the word music, by picking out a language device and picking out a key word, I am analysing language and not structure. And you won't get any marks for that. Avoid analysing language. You do not need to pick out key words here. Instead, at the beginning of the extract, the writer lulls the reader into a false sense of security by creating an atmosphere of calm celebration with the description of the twitterings and rustlings alongside sounds like music and flying tents. It's the establishing of the atmosphere which is important, not the way in which he does it. So you put your quotations in to exemplify the atmosphere, but you don't analyse those quotations. Instead, what we do next is we now look at the movements as we go through the text. The feeling of positive excitement is intensified by the shift in perspective to Eccles and his declaration that he is shaking like a kid. However, this atmosphere of calm only serves to heighten the tension of the characters and the reader when everyone's stopped, a tension which is magnified by the silence and then increased further with the sound of thunder, which foreshadows the entrance of the T-Rex. You can see I'm loading this with evidence, and I would suggest that your structure answer has more quotations in it, but less analysis of those quotations. Instead, look at the verbs I'm using. Excitement is intensified. Tension is heightened. The tension is magnified, increased further. Something is foreshadowed. This is about the shifts and movements and changes as the extract develops. And then we're making links between different areas of the extract here. By establishing our empathy with the characters, the writer is able to increase our concern for them when the T-Rex comes in with its great oiled, resilient striding legs, whereby zooming in, the between the monstrosity of the animal and the insignificance of the men who now appear like toys, thereby increasing the anxiety of the reader. So it's about the emotional journey of the reader, our emotional response to the characters, and how that emotional response is manipulated by the way the writer changes things as the extract develops. That's what a structure answer is all about. Now, I've only analysed the start of the extract here. What I would advise you to do is to take one example from the beginning, one example from near the middle, and one example from near the end, because the question does tell you to look at the whole of the source, and that would ensure you have looked at the whole of the source.